Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're watching this from. Welcome to Live with Dan on this Friday. We have a very special guest coming up today, Emmanuel Probst, and I will bring him on in a second. I wanted to first mention X Day. This is our user conference that we have coming up in about a month. So it's less than 30 days away. It's on October 26th here in Austin, Texas, bringing together some of the best speakers and obviously content about Question Pro and some workshops as well. So hope you can join us for that. If you use code DAN-guest, you get a complimentary pass to join us. So feel free to do that. The link is in the comments here. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to answer that on any questions you have. All right, so on the show today, we have Emmanuel Probst, who's a global lead of brand thought leadership at Ipsos, adjunct professor at UCLA, and a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of Brand Hacks and Assemblage, the art and science of brand transformation. So very excited to have Emmanuel here today. So Emmanuel, welcome to the show.
Dan, thank you so much for having me on the show. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's great. I'm super excited that you're on today. I'm really excited to talk about your book and just hearing your thoughts on brand. I was, looking through some of the information, and I was like, man, maybe my whole perception on brand is going to change after talking with you. So we'll see. So what is assemblage, and why did you write the book? I think that's probably a good way to kick this off.
Yeah, assemblage is terminology inspired from winemaking. That is, when you make wine, whiskey, cognac, bourbon, what have you. And I think that's really a good thing to say on a Friday, by the way. You
Yeah,
do
sounds
so,
good.
you do so by combining dozens, sometimes over 100 samples from different aging processes, different barrels, different
Mm,
grapes, different regions. And you want to come up with the best combination to create a product that is unique and on brand. And now,
mm,
what's important when you create a bourbon again, or cognac, champagne, what have you, is you want to understand what the product is going to be like today. And most importantly, you want to have a vision for what the product is going to, how the product is going to evolve over 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10
mm,
years. So
mm-hmm,
this analogy is applied to branding in the book, whereby I believe that we can create brands by assembling personal, social, and cultural attributes. That's how we can create great brands. The learning here is not necessarily the guy with the most money, with the biggest checkbook that's going to win. What's
mm,
important is to be culturally relevant and relevant to the people we talk to, and what's important is, again, to have a vision. Now, why did I write the book? Is because I think we're overwhelmed with brands, we're overwhelmed with products as individuals. We have studies that show that if 78% of brands were to disappear, people could just replace them literally overnight with a
mm.
substitute product. They wouldn't even think twice about it. And I also believe that brands can no longer just sell products. Brands must also transform us individuals and the world we live in. So that's why I wrote this book, to
Mm.
say we can create better brands. We can create brands that are more impactful, that make a positive impact on people and the world around them. And this book shows you how.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And then, so assemblage is really sort of this idea that brands. I mean, there's a lot of different things that go into a brand, right? You have to create that good combination of all of these things. And I really like that analogy because I was actually reading a book recently. It's called Pappy Land, but it's
Mhm.
about like the whiskey making process in Kentucky and everything. And it was interesting just hearing, the whole process and all these behind the scenes. So I definitely understand what you're saying there in terms of it takes all these different components to really produce something that's meaningful and that people are going to enjoy and like. So I really like that book title. What in terms of you say the brands must transform us, and I'm kind of interested in that. Can you talk about that a little bit and tell me what you mean by brands must transform us?
Absolutely. The brand is not the hero. As brand leaders, marketers, advertisers, we need to take a step back and accept, realize, appreciate, understand that we know way more about our brand and our category than anyone else does, and we care a
Mhm.
lot more than people do. People care about themselves as they should. The brand is not the hero. The brand is here in a supporting role to take people, so the individuals, people are the hero. The brand is here to take you from who you are, Mr. Consumer, to who you want to become. And the
Mhm.
brand is in this supporting role to fulfill your personal identity project. That is, how do I want to feel? Who do I want to become? Who do I want to be perceived as? How am I going to fit into
Mhm.
a specific group, a specific tribe? And how do I relate to culture and the world around me? And that is the opportunity for the brand to make an impact and make a difference.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So it really transforms us from all of those different aspects. And I like what you said around the tribes aspect. I think that's interesting, right? Because oftentimes I feel even purchase a brand because I like what they stand for and I feel some sort of association to it that oftentimes I can't even articulate why. It might be the label, it might be who's behind it. But it's interesting that all of these different factors kind of play into these brands. And what are some of those different types of attributes that you can assemble or that brands can assemble to make these to make it meaningful for us?
Yeah, what you said, Dan, is so important. You said sometimes I like a brand, I cannot really articulate why. And
Hmm.
I hear two things here. One is, this system one thinking of your brain
Hmm.
associating a need or a task with a brand straight away without having to think about it. That's literally it becomes intuitive. And also
Hmm.
the power of distinctive brand assets. That might be a color, that might be a sound, that might be a font, that might be a character, that
Hmm.
might be a tagline. And we see this in our studies at Ipsos. A given brand might play across, 5, 7, 12, 15 different attributes. Yet we see that uh, few attributes are very important and make a lot of difference. So
Hmm.
the different types of attributes that I cover in the book are the personal, social, cultural attributes. The personal attributes is me. What I mean by me is not me, Emmanuel, is uh, me, the individual, my identity project. And then the social attributes, that's the world around us. That's your
Hmm.
immediate community, your friends, your family, your associates, the people you'll bump into at the coffee shop this morning. And then
Hmm.
the world is the world at large, the societal, the social, the economic issues that are important to the country you live in and the world at large. And so it is by assembling those different types of attributes and playing on those different dimensions that
Hmm.
you build a brand that is distinctive and differentiated.
Gotcha. So I like what you said around sort of like the relative importance is different for each of those different brands, right? I mean, and what makes up, you might have like 15 different things that you care about with the brand, but the relative importance between each of those is not equal, right? So it could be like the top three things or top three attributes that you like. What are some of those like the top three things that you see that really help with I guess people attaching themselves to a brand? Is it the social and the cultural and those things, or are there other things in there that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. So in the book, you have some overarching attributes, as you said, the personal, social, and cultural attributes. Now, in the creative execution, you're also going to look at specific colors, specific fonts,
Hmm.
specific sounds, and so on and so forth. Uh, but the short answer to your question, Dan, is what's most important to people, again, is how can brands transform me into who I want to become? That is, how can brands reassure me about my past, my present, my future? How can brands help me deal with my
Hmm.
my real self and my digital self? Who am I in real life and who am I online? Uh, how can brands deliver a very personalized experience? That is, brands must talk to me, not to the masses. So those are the most important avenues, I would say, for brands to succeed. And then
Hmm.
when we talk about the local community, it has to be um, about creating a perception for the brand and what it stands for. And the world at large, that's where brands are activists, if you will. What I mean by
Hmm.
this is brands can take a stance on social issues, on economic issues. Brands can drive an ESG agenda, sustainability, upcycling, recycling, not just talk about those
Hmm.
important themes, but demonstrate their commitment and their impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And one of the things you really said kind of sparked a story that I came up recently, in that they come. You said that brands help us like transform us, or they kind of move us into what we want to be, right? And I think it's interesting. I'll tell you a little story. So there's this brand that was started by Jesse Itzler, who's a entrepreneur, married to Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx and all this.
Yeah.
And he has a brand called All Day Running Company, right? And so I always wanted to like get into running and do a little bit more of that. So there's this backpack. So I bought the backpack, and of course, All Day Running is on, the label and everything is on the backpack. Well, I was traveling recently through Austin, and the TSA agent said, "All Day Running, like, what is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's a brand. I really like the brand." And she said, "All day, that sounds terrible to run all day." And I said, "Well, it's kind of just like this acronym of like, you want to like, oh, I can do this for all day." And she said, "Well, is it working?" And I said, "Well, that's why I bought it, to like try to inspire me to like, to try to run a little bit more." And so it was interesting because that resonated exactly with what you're saying, at least for me, in that I bought the backpack because I like the brand and it's something that I'm kind of aspiring to be. So I think you're dead on there. So kind of interesting. But in the book you also talk about anti-heroes, saviors, villains. What do those have to do with brands?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In marketing, and in advertising, we often leverage archetypes. And what I mean by this is everyone is familiar with the archetype of the hero. And so the hero is Batman, is Superman, and is someone with superpowers. And that's
Hmm.
fine. Yet the heroes are not necessarily very relatable. They're aspirational, but they're not so relatable because, put it this way, most of us cannot jump from one building to another. And so
Hmm.
in the book, I look at those archetypes of anti heroes, villains, and saviors, whereby they are more relatable. What we're trying to achieve here, Dan and our listeners, is we want to reduce the social distance between the brand and the audience. We want to make the brand more personal, more relatable, more humble, if you will.
Hmm.
And to
Hmm.
do this, people like themselves. And what I mean by this is an anti-hero, for example, is someone who can do something heroic,
Hmm.
yet has flaws and is challenged and is struggling. And we will side with the anti-hero because we all know that at the end of the day, we are not perfect. So Don Draper is an anti-hero, and James Bond is an anti-hero, and Daniel Craig in the Belvedere vodka ad is an
Hmm.
anti-hero. And the point here is to, uh, again, reduce this distance and leverage archetypes of people that are relatable and that we want to associate with. Villains are also very powerful for that reason, because at the end of the day, in most movies, villains, or in pop culture, if you will, villains are sympathetic in nature.
Hmm.
If you think of an ad for General Motors,
Hmm.
where we see villains inspired from Austin Powers, inspired
Hmm.
from a James Bond movie. And the
Yeah.
villain says at the end of the ad, he says, I need to save the world first before I can take over the world. So that's an example of a villain we want to relate to. In music, look at the band Kiss, or
Hmm.
think of Black Sabbath and
Hmm.
Ozzy Osbourne. Those are very sympathetic villains, if you will. All this to say that those archetypes are not the traditional same old seen before hero archetypes, and
Hmm.
they're powerful in their ability to reduce the social distance between the brand and the audience.
Interesting, interesting. I didn't think the band Kiss would come up on this talk, Emmanuel, but you did it. So no, no, I like that. I like that example. I mean, I think it's interesting in just how people relate to each other and reduce that social distance between. And and have those different feelings. So no, that's super interesting. And then one of the things is, and this is something actually I'm kind of interested about, and I saw this in your book, and I was thinking, man, I would need to ask you about this. In the book, you argue that creations of art, music, marketing, and even some tech or technologies are not original. What do you mean by that? And I'm curious to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's m- my message of optimism and empowerment for our listeners today
Hmm.
is you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Hmm.
And in fact, most of us do not. Very few products, very few brands are truly new.
Hmm.
And the same reasoning applies in music, in the arts, in cooking, and in the books. By the way, there are 240 references in my book. I created that book based on many inspirations. And the point I'm making is that you want to copy, transform, and combine. You want to repurpose. You want to draw inspiration from something else and someone else and
Hmm.
repurpose this, reframe it in a different context towards a different audience to support a different need. And that is really what I mean here by saying most creations are not originals. There are so many examples. Apple did not invent the MP3 player. Apple did not invent the recycling bin. Apple did
Hmm.
not invent the clicker. Star Wars is inspired from another book. It's not an
Hmm.
original creation either. In music, if you think about electronic dance music that is very popular these days, the likes
Hmm.
of David Guetta, for example, or those big DJs, Martin Garrix, Marshmello, by definition, create music from many samples, many influences. It's the
Hmm.
same thing in cooking. If you think of someone like Gordon Ramsay, Jamie Oliver, Alain Ducasse, fill the blank, any big chef you heard of, they create recipes, again, following this process of assemblage, whereby you pick and choose from different cultures, from different spices, from different cooking techniques, and you deliver with a vision for what the dish and the cooking is going to be. You
Hmm.
have not invented garlic and onions. That's really not the point. And the same thing in the arts. So that's all to say that in branding,
Hmm.
um, and in marketing in general, that is really what we do most of the time, what we should do. And the brands we admire are very successful and for a reason. Yet Starbucks has not invented coffee.
Hmm.
Starbucks has imported a concept from Italy, and Starbucks has invented the concept of a third place that is neither your home nor the office, where
Hmm.
you can meet people. And Starbucks delivers on a personal identity project. Who am I and who do I want to become? Well, when I walk out of Starbucks with that uh, mug, a cup with a mermaid on it, I feel
Hmm.
different and I feel that I'm part of a tribe. So Starbucks has not, people have been roasting coffees for dozens, if not hundreds of years before Starbucks.
Right, right. No, it's interesting, and when you put it like that, it's like, is anything original anymore? I don't know. I mean, even if I think about, like let's say, like let's take Tesla for example, right? Like they didn't invent the car, nor did they invent the electric car. They just made it better, right? So
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's
well, that's an
interesting.
excellent example. Tesla did not invent Tesla in a similar vein as Apple.
Hmm.
So number one was in a blue ocean, the first ones to market. And I do believe, some people argue on this, but I do believe there is an advantage to the first entrant. But importantly, Tesla made the electric car desirable from an emotional standpoint
Hmm.
and reliable from a functional standpoint for
Hmm.
users. That's the success right here. As you said, oh, and by the way, a car by definition is an assemblage. Tesla doesn't make tires.
Hmm.
Tesla
That's a good
builds the
point.
tires. Tesla is starting to make batteries, but you see what I mean? Most automakers don't make their own batteries. And we can
Hmm.
go on and on. Nobody produces, no car maker produces the gas that gets into the car.
Right,
Um,
right.
so that's an assemblage in and of itself.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. you think about all the different components of a car, and we're, all the different companies that have their hands in there. It is an assemblage for sure. I mean,
It
it's pretty
is.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
a,
wild.
a gas-powered car has about 1,300 moving parts. A electric car about 400, I believe.
Hmm.
And in all likelihood, an overwhelming majority of those moving parts are not created by the automaker.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. It's kind of a paradigm shift a little bit for a lot of people, I'm sure, starting to think about that. You also talk about storytelling. Obviously, it's it's a buzzword. Been hearing a lot about it. It's been a topic of dozens of articles and books. Obviously, everybody wants to get better at storytelling. What's your contribution to that?
Uh, to storytelling, you mean? To
Yeah,
being
to
better at
storytelling.
storytelling? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, don't try to be someone you're not.
Mm,
Don't try to do too much. People can tell, just like in B2B, when you have too many keywords and it becomes some word salad of corporate bullshit that nobody believes in. And the
hmm.
same thing applies towards consumer marketing. Some brands try to do too many things. You don't have to do brand purpose plus ESG plus sustainability plus diversity and inclusion plus emotional benefits plus premium plus driving. It's just too much. And
Hmm.
so, the big difference we see before and after COVID is 5 years ago, you could claim something as a brand. Today, you have to demonstrate this thing. And
Mm,
my point being is, I'm telling our audience today, not only you don't have to do everything that's outlined in the book, but in fact, I'm telling you not to. Pick and choose what works for your brand, what lines up, what is credible and believable.
mm,
Because if you're an airline and you tell people that you're going to be carbon neutral by 2025, nobody's going to believe you. It's There is an airport in London, it's London Heathrow, that
hmm.
claims to become carbon neutral, I think, by 2030. Well, if you read the small prints, it's really the airport operation, not the airport. Oh, and
Hmm.
by the way, it's only part of the operation that London Heathrow controls, not the entire airport, even.
Hmm.
And my
Right.
point being, I don't mean to pick on them. It's a very humble mission uh, to try to tackle global warming when you're in the airline industry or operating airports for that matter. I'm just saying that let's take a step back and sometimes do something small, but something that is credible, believable, that you can deliver on, and you can do that immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Kind of back up your claims, right? At least show that, and then you probably get some of that brand trust and loyalty that you're referring to. One of the things in the book, you obviously you talk about big brands like Dove, Airbnb, and some smaller ones. What are there some comparisons there, or why did you do that? Like, what are
Yeah.
some things that we should take away from that?
The takeaway is in the marketing community, number one, we too often fall back on a few case studies that are great and inspirational,
Hmm.
yet there are so few of them.
Mm,
We hear about Nike and Airbnb and Patagonia, and
mm,
that's great, but there is more to it. Those brands are anecdotal in nature for so many reasons. The second reason is because the United States is mostly driven by small and medium businesses. Only 7% of us work for Fortune 500, 100 companies.
mm,
93% of the workforce in America is employed at smaller firms. And
mhm,
that's all to say that 93% of CMOs don't have the budget that the likes of Airbnb, Nike, and Apple are going to deploy. So that's why in the book, of course, I like to uh, look at those big brands and what we can learn from them. But the truth is, what Airbnb doesn't scale down to a boutique hotel that has 25 rooms in the Hamptons
mhm,
or in California or anywhere else in the country. So I wanted to provide smaller brands with the tools to win, even though they don't have $50 million, nor even $5 million, and sometimes not even $500,000 to spend
Hmm.
on marketing and advertising.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. No, makes sense. And Airbnb is an interesting case study in itself because they don't own any properties yet,
Yeah.
but it's they you feel like they do even though they don't own a single property. So kind of interesting there too. Um,
So if I may, Dan, if I may,
yeah,
Airbnb
yeah.
exemplifies this thinking. Airbnb takes you from who you are to who you want to become.
Hmm.
Airbnb does not sell a bed, a pillow with chocolate on the pillow. Marriott can do this. Hilton can do this. The big guys, they have Marriott operates 100, I think 120, 130,000 hotel rooms in the world. So Marriott can do that. What Airbnb sells is a connection to the local community. It's a unique, personable, authentic, humble experience that
Hmm.
has uniqueness and character to it. And what Airbnb sells is this fulfillment of your personal identity project of adventure, exploration, and discovery. If you
Hmm.
want a clean bathroom, a treadmill, and a nice check-in experience, go to Marriott, which is fine. I go to Marriott all the time. I just want to be
Hmm.
clear. I'm not being critical of those big brands. They have a great purpose and they have a great fit in the marketplace. I just mean
Hmm.
here to articulate what the Airbnb promise is about and its ambition beyond a traditional hotel offering.
Right, right. It's all about those experiences, right? So it's interesting. We did have someone said, great point about small businesses, the associated psychographics and the variables must surely go unnoticed. So it's interesting that point. And then it looks like you have a new reader here too, Emmanuel. Someone found a new book to read, so good job there.
Uh, well, thank you, Lianka, and to our previous listener on psychographics, 100%. Let's take a step back. Too often in marketing, we think in terms of core demographics, so age, gender, region,
Hmm.
household income. And the reality is these, they're relevant, they're good to look at, yet they matter for when you buy a house or a car. Income, for example, it matters when you buy a house or a car. But if I'm
Hmm.
trying to sell you a $7 Frappuccino, frankly, it doesn't really matter if you're a part-time student making $15,000 a year on campus, or if you're a SVP, let's call it $150,000 for sake of argument, or if you're a
Hmm.
CEO making $1.5 million.
Hmm.
What matters here are those psychographics, as we heard from our listener, our viewer today. What are your
Hmm.
beliefs? What are your attitudes? What experience do you want to engage in? Once again, who are you and who do you want to become? Is it an
Hmm.
indulgence? Is it a social moment? Is it a connection with someone else? That is how I'm going to sell you that $7 Frappuccino. It's not so much worrying about your household income and the color of your skin.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I think people really buy into the stories behind the brands and that tribe nature of it. It makes sense a lot. So, Emmanuel, obviously really enjoyed the conversation today. I think, to wrap things up, tell us one thing that will inspire us to become assemblers.
Hmm. Lean in, go to your risk.
Mm,
The book is optimistic. The book outlines that there is an opportunity for marketers to do the right thing. Uh, Let me put it this way, Dan. Think about David Ogilvy. David Ogilvy will say senior executives don't have the monopoly over the great ideas. So, what I'm telling to our audience is that 99% of us did not go to the top 1% schools. I
hmm.
didn't, by the way.
Hmm.
99% of us did not grow up with a trust fund. I didn't. The point is whether you've been in this industry 20 plus years and you're a C-level executive at a Fortune 100, or you're an intern or you're 6 months out of undergrad and you work at a mid-sized firm, you all have the opportunity to contribute. And I will say that, in fact, in many situations, those younger professionals newer to the industry, if you will, can make in many ways a greater impact because of their understanding of pop culture, of social media,
Mm-hmm.
and just how the world is shaped these days. So my point being is like, do not be shy, lean in, contribute, voice your opinions and your ideas, no matter if you've been at it for 6 weeks, 6 months, or 30 years.
Got it. Awesome. Awesome. Wise words for sure. Emmanuel, really appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Dan, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to our viewers and listeners today. Really appreciate that.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today.